Hello, and welcome to Media Assault, the podcast about movies, music, and video games. Visit us online at MediaAssault.com or on Twitter at Media Assault. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Media Assault, the podcast about movies, music, and video games. My name is Sean Kazat, and I'm your host. This week, I wanted to talk to you about the dangers of retro gaming. Now, you may be saying to yourself, dangers of retro gaming? What the hell is this guy talking about? Just bear with me a second. Now, if you've been listening to this podcast since the beginning, you know that I'm old enough to remember playing the home version of Pong when it hit stores in the 1970s. I cut my teeth on arcade games in the mid-70s before Space Invaders and Pac-Man became huge. I had an Atari 2600 in 1981. I spent a good chunk of my high school years playing video games either in the arcade or at home on the Commodore 64. In the years after high school, I had a Sega Genesis, an NES, a Super Nintendo, an Amiga 500. I also had an Atari Jaguar, an Amiga CD32, and a Sony PlayStation. And I used to work for a company that sold the 3DO, so I used to play a lot of that system too. So believe me when I say that I have a lot of strong and happy memories playing games in my youth. And I say that and recount all of those different systems, not to brag, but just to set the stage of where I'm coming from when I give my opinions on the current state of retro gaming. Now, in 2004, I was living in a small apartment in Youngstown, Ohio. I didn't have room for them, but I still managed to have a Commodore 128, an Amiga 1000, a PC, an Xbox, and a PS2. When I took a job in Cleveland and I had to move, I went to get my old computers out of storage in the basement. And that's when I realized that the storage area had flooded and my old computers, the 128 and the Amiga, had been destroyed. Their accompanying monitors had also been ruined. Now, I was slightly distraught, but I didn't think too much about it because no one really wanted or used those systems anymore. Back then, if I wanted to replace them, I probably could have done so on eBay without spending too much money. Hell, I probably could have gone to a garage sale and picked up 2 or 3 old computer setups and spent less than $20. And yet, I never bothered to do it. And a year or so later, I was at a classic video game show, and I came across a Commodore 1702 monitor on sale for $20. I walked around, looking at the old game systems on display, checking out the different vendors, and I eventually decided to go back and get the monitor. But I'd waited too long. It sold. But again, I wasn't too upset because you could find those cheap all over the place. Now let's flash forward to today. The going rate on eBay for a Commodore 128 is about $150 for just the system, not even a monitor. An Amiga 1000 setup with a monitor could easily top $500 or more. A Commodore 1702 monitor now goes for about $100. Now, this is all before shipping costs are factored in, and shipping those items is not cheap. Local sellers, who would put an ad on Craigslist or even an ad in the paper, have caught wind of these inflated prices and are charging about the same as the people on eBay. There's a demand for this old hardware and plenty of systems to go around. Most of these items aren't really rare as much as they're desirable. People of a certain age, like myself, have fond memories of these systems and want to relive those carefree, or in some cases careless, days of their youth. This new desirability has crossed over to almost every video game brand that's ever existed. Old video game systems and computers are increasing in value, or at least perceived value, all across the map. Target and Walmart even have dedicated aisles in their electronic areas that are for retro electronics. You can find remakes of the old handheld football game from Mattel, so-called flashback systems that emulate a number of cartridges for the 2600, or the Sega Genesis, ColecoVision, or Intellivision. There are even portable versions of the Atari 2600 and the Sega Genesis. Most popular of all, that you probably won't even see in stock, are the classic systems from Nintendo. Small versions of their classic NES and Super NES systems that play 20 to 30 old games and can be connected to the HD TVs of today. These regularly sell out when a store gets them in stock. And retro collections of games are available for the PS4 and Xbox One, and are also available for the PC and game systems going back to the PlayStation 1. So you may be wondering, what am I getting to? What is the point of this episode? What are these dangers of retro gaming? And there is a point to all this, and that point is that for most people, spending lavishly to relive those old days and those old games is really a waste of money. Because if you're a current gamer playing the likes of God of War, Horizon Zero Dawn, or even Fortnite, loading up and playing a game of Pac-Man on the Atari 2600 might keep you occupied for about 5 minutes tops. And more than likely, that's going to be accompanied by a grimace and possibly a slight amount of vomit. The memory of playing it as a kid in the 8th grade after anticipating it for weeks before its release seems fond and good. But the reality of playing that 1981 game in 2018 is more than likely going to be a disappointment, and even more so if you paid $150 for the experience. Memory has a way of making us think things were better in the good old days, and that manifests itself in many ways. As we get older, we tend to romanticize the things we thought were great when they were really still great. But if that was the case, and things couldn't be improved, we'd all still be driving rear-wheel drive cars that get 8 miles to the gallon and have no airbags. Now that's not to criticize people who want to go back and replay these old systems and these old games. Absolutely not. I'm just trying to warn those that can be easily swept up in hype and suddenly become enamored with the idea of reliving those days of yore to the point where they could be easily lured to spend a lot of cash on old memories. Those are the people who'd be willing to wait in line to spend $80 on the Super NES Classic from Nintendo when they hear it's going to be in stock on a certain day. And then if those systems sell out, and they usually do because for some reason Nintendo likes to produce only small quantities of them, you might be one of the people who will turn to eBay and buy them from the scalpers who manage to get their hands on one, and then turns around and sells it for double or even triple the MSRP. The more you spend, the more likely you are to be disappointed. I can guarantee you that at least one of the games that you remember so fondly from your childhood is going to provoke a reaction of disbelief now that you're older. If you're simply a curiosity seeker, wondering what people played in the 1980s and 1990s, blindly spending a ton of money to do so is also likely to provide a WTF moment. So if you're interested in playing classic games, make sure you won't be setting yourself up for disappointment. Do yourself a favor and check out those games first via emulators on your PC or your Mac or whatever system you run. There is emulator software for almost every imaginable system that's ever been released to market. Just Google video game emulators and you'll be off on a journey of discovery that won't cost you a penny, and as a result, will likely be a lot of fun because it's so cheap. If you want the convenience, though, of having something hooked up to your TV, like you did back in the old days, get yourself a Raspberry Pi. Now, to me, this is the king of available options. Now, this is just my opinion, and it does take a little bit of handiwork, but it does provide the most bang for your buck. The Raspberry Pi is a fully functional computer that can be purchased for less than $40, and it's capable of running emulated versions of most video game systems up through the Nintendo 64, although it gets a little dicey if you run the more optimal or the more modern systems and you want to try to get an optimal experience. So stick to about the PlayStation 1 and older. But all you do is you use front-end software called RetroPie that's freely available on the internet, and I was able to turn my Raspberry Pi computer into a machine that plays Atari 2600, Atari 7800, NES, Super NES, PlayStation, Commodore 64, Sega Master System, Genesis, and 32X games. And it's capable of doing much more than that, but I honestly have plenty to keep me busy with just that lineup. I literally have over 1,000 games to play. And I can save those games, even on games that originally didn't have the capability of saving on their original system. Obtaining the games themselves is as easy as downloading pre-assembled collection of ROM files and extracting them to your computer. Now, there are some entrepreneurs who will buy the components for the Raspberry Pi, download the games, and assemble those RetroPie systems, and then resell them for twice what they cost. Trust me, if I can put together a working RetroPie system, anybody can. So don't buy one of those pre-configured machines unless you've got more money than you know what to do with. And that's the whole point of this podcast, is to help you save a little bit of money to relive those old games. I spent, all told, about $100 total on the Raspberry Pi system, a PS4 controller, a case that dissipates heat, an SD card for game storage, and a power supply. And the system can use most Bluetooth or USB game controllers, so buying a special controller really isn't a necessity. If you want to get super fancy, you can find cases for the machine that look like older systems, like the NES and the Super NES, and you can get specialized controllers that mimic those systems as well. My PlayStation 4 controller handles all the functionality for the games I have, so I've never bothered with any of those types of controllers. And again, though, my point is that there's absolutely nothing wrong with actively enjoying or being curious about the old systems. Just don't get suckered by your memory into spending a lot of hard-earned cash to relive the past based on your memory alone. Buyer's remorse is a terrible feeling. And to those of you that enjoy restoring old systems and playing them, that's a completely different story altogether. That's a full-fledged hobby and well worth the time spent. I actually admire the talent and skill involved in that, and I really wish I could do that. I honestly believe that playing a game on a system from the past that made you happy back then, and that you can still enjoy now, can be one of the most heartwarming feelings a gamer can have. So use your best judgment and play away. That's it for this week's Media Assault. I hope you liked what you heard, and I look forward to having you as a regular listener. Feel free to drop me an email at sean@media-assault.com. You can also reach me at Twitter at Media Assault, and that's one word. Media Assault is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and Stitcher, and is hosted on Buzzsprout. Thanks again for listening. Take it easy.